climate issues, but someone who's really trying to bring others into this as well. Someone who's reaching across the aisle to make sure that we actually get the votes, not just to make a statement, but to change our policy. So, no, thank you. I mean, I hadn't seen this, but thank you for sharing it with me. But no, I mean, it is unfortunately false. But thank you. So let's
take another question.
Like that. Is it the bigger groups that put those things together, or is it just individuals that are looking to discredit?
Well, you know,
Can you repeat her question?
I'm sorry. The question. I'm sorry. The question was who puts things like this out? You know, who's out there trying to discredit people? You know, I don't know who put this out. It doesn't seem to have any citations. But that's sort of a lesson that I learned in school when you were writing papers. But you know, the fact of the matter is that there are big corporations that will try to discredit us, and then there are you know, people on the political, you know, fringes. And if you look at my Twitter feed, you can see that people say nasty things to me all day. And you know, I recognize that this is just part of the job. That you have to be willing to you know, sometimes just understand that you know, I could vote against, you know, I could vote for the most uncontroversial thing imaginable. You know, we could have a resolution that says racism is bad and we shouldn't support racism, and I guarantee you there'll be someone who says I'm a terrible person for voting for that. I mean, it's just no matter what you do, right? But I think the sad part is that when things like this are really you know, actually hypocritical and actually not helpful to goals that we share. There is no one in this room who's going to agree with me on every single vote I take. I take hundreds of votes. I've already probably taken 300 votes in the U.S. Congress. Sometimes issues are complicated. Sometimes, you know, a lot of what we do is try to find compromises that work for the American people. But it's very easy to find a reason why you don't like something and a reason to vote against it. Sometimes it's hard to actually come up with, to say, you know, this isn't perfect. This isn't the way I would write the piece of legislation, but it's a step in the right direction. And that's what we try to do. But then there'll be someone who will just say, well, did you know that there's this one little provision in this bill, and this makes you sound like you're, you know, not supportive of the environment or whatever it is. And if you always get defined by those exceptions in the eyes of people, then we're not going to be able to work together to get things done. So I think it's important that people always take a balanced view. You know, there may be some time when I take a vote that you think is not pro-environmental. There actually might be some very complex reasons why it is, or maybe there's some other considerations, or other, you know, maybe if we pass this bill, we can get Republicans on board, even though there was a version that I would have preferred that's a little bit stronger, but it wouldn't have passed. It wouldn't have gotten signed. But those are considerations that we take into account every day. But if you were to just take that politician who takes one vote that you don't like and say, oh, well, this person, you know, is a terrible person, he must be opposed to the environment. Well, not only is that an untruthful description of who that politician is or how he votes, it's really not helpful to our shared goals.
We've got a question over here.
Jeff Cohen, Congressman Moulton. First of all, thank you for being so great at listening to the community. Perhaps one way we could change the paradigm is to reduce the 10 times subsidy for fossil fuels and devote more of that to renewable sustainables like wind and solar.
Well, Jeff, first of all, thank you for your work in the community on solar energy in particular. And I could not agree with you more. You know, I think someone was asking me a very philosophical question a couple nights ago about what the role is of government. And in many ways, I think the role of government, not to try to be a political scientist, which I'm not. My degree is in physics. But I think the role of government in some ways is to correct for externalities. You know, we want the free market to function as well as it can. That's what our society has been based on for hundreds of years. But sometimes you need to correct for externalities to make sure that, you know, that we have a system to catch people who fall. That when there are negative consequences to things like cigarette smoking, that lead to healthcare costs down the road. We put taxes on cigarettes, not just to discourage cigarette smoking, but also to pay for those consequences. So that's kind of government stepping in and dealing with externalities. The problem with our energy system is that government is doing the exact opposite. It's making the problem worse. It's actually subsidizing the problem, right? So this is something that we need to fix. And incidentally, it applies to the ways that energy is used as well. And a great example is our transportation sector. You know, we have huge subsidies for autos, for cars, in all sorts of different ways. Everything from sending troops overseas to secure our oil supplies and make sure oil stays cheap, to the fact that, you know, everybody flips out about another $10 million for the T, and yet we spend literally billions of dollars subsidizing our highway system every year. Now, I'm not anti-car. I just think we should have a balanced system. And I think that people should pay their costs.
We've got a question here.
David Redu from Salem.
I did.
Congressman, I think part of the challenge here is that people don't have a great vision for success, both for what our energy system could look like in the future and for the legislative path to get there. So much of the fight has been about is climate change real or not, and not about what the solutions look like. Can you lay out a little bit of what your vision for what energy should look like on the North Shore 10, 20, 30 years from now, but also the key legislative steps that could enable that future?
Sure. Well, there's a lot in that question, and thank you for your work on this. But assuming that we're not saddling up for another 60-minute monologue question, I'll just give you a few points. I mean, first of all, we have got to start using more carbon-free sources of energy. I mean, that's without question. And we have to be smart about how we do that too. You know, there's a lot of, and this is a good example of something that may be controversial, but there is a lot of concern in the environmental community with the single greatest source of carbon-free energy that we have in the world today, and that's nuclear power. Now, I spent an afternoon at MIT recently, an entire afternoon, to try to understand what their work is on the future of nuclear power. And actually, they have some really inspiring research going on about ways that you can build nuclear reactors that just simply, by the basic physics of the reactor, you can't have an accident like Fukushima or Chernobyl or whatnot. And I think we've got to be open to ideas like that because we've got to stop putting all this carbon into our atmosphere. So that's an example of something where I think that, you know, if you just go with the dogmatic view and you don't look at the numbers, you don't look at the facts, you might not come up with the right solutions. I have consistently voted for solar and wind energy tax credits, but I also know that solar and wind energy do not provide a base load, not at least until we can have much better storage technology that we have today. If you actually do the math on how many windmills it would take and wind turbines to produce the power required by the United States every day, you'd be pretty shocked at the result. And it's clear that that's not a viable solution. So we have to have an energy mix, and it's got to include a variety of sources. But there's no question that in the long run, we've got to move away from carbon energy sources. I'll give you another example where I think we have to be careful. There's been a lot of talk, and particularly in this region of the country, about using hydropower from Canada. Well, it wasn't 15, 20 years ago when everyone in the environmental community was completely opposed to hydropower because of all the damage it's doing to our rivers and our ecosystems. And actually, I think that's kind of right. And I think a lot of people are just sort of conveniently forgetting that right now, because hydropower, especially when it comes from Canada, you don't have to see the dams, and you don't have to see the rivers that are losing their fish populations. It seems like a great energy source. I think we got to be a lot more careful about that. So I hope that Massachusetts can be a leader for carbon-free energy in innovative science-based, math-based ways to get there. One of those ways is by, I think, really pushing the development of safe nuclear technology, of solar technology. I think solar has tremendous potential. You know, if you just look at how much energy comes to our country every single day from the sun. I mean, if we can just get a little bit more efficient at converting that into electricity, we could have an awful lot more power. So there are things like that we need to pursue. And by the way, what a great economic opportunity if we can, if we can be a leader in that research and development right here in Massachusetts.